Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and today I'm bringing you another book review from the Ghost of Fear Street book series, and it's book number 23, Why I'm Not Afraid of Ghosts. Now, this was a first time read for me, and I was curious to try this out because my buddy over at BD Horror told me and everybody in the Discord chat that this was the worst kids' horror book that he ever read. And then my boy Monster Blood followed up and read it and didn't like it himself. And it started a war of words in the chat because some people have read it before. And like Spongy444 and Jude DeLuca, who are also in the chat, are quite big fans of this. So they wanted me to try out the book to see what it's like. And you know, since I haven't read a Ghost of Fear Street book in a while, I was curious to try this one because of what I heard. And I have to say, for how love it or hate it seems to be, sometimes I just land in the middle of books, and for this book, it's no different. This book, I have some severe issues with it, but it's not all that bad. In fact, would I recommend this book to people to try out? Sure. I think there's something in this book, maybe not for BD Horror, but there's something in this book I think for most people out there to gravitate towards. Now, if you ask me personally, given the issues that I have with it, and I'll get into that near the end of the video, I don't think most people will really like this. But if you're into like niche feeling books, and I'll get into why it's niche as well, this might do something for you. So let's get into the plot overview without giving too much away. So, in this book, the main character is this middle schooler named Oliver. And he has moved into a new house on Fear Street. And he is up in his attic with this new friend that he made in town named Sean. And Sean is telling Oliver about ghosts that seemingly haunt almost every house on Fear Street. And Oliver tells Sean that there's no such thing as ghosts and that he's not afraid of them because it's all make-believe jargon, essentially. And Sean seems to really harp on it, but Oliver's not impressed and says, let's hang out and do something else. So they head down to another room of the house. And then it kicks on essentially the main characters of the story. You would think that it's Oliver, but it is actually these two ghosts who live in Oliver's house that he moved into. And their names are Robbie and Dora. And for the majority of the story, you're in the first person of one of the ghosts named Robbie. And in case you don't know what I'm saying here is, this book essentially puts you in the perspective of a villain, which is very refreshing and very different than your normal kids' horror book. If you're fans of something like Slappy's Nightmare, you know what I'm talking about. But, yeah. So, Robbie and Dora get to talking about Oliver and how Oliver seems to be this pretentious kid, but they're going to find ways to scare him like they always do. And they get into some backstory, especially with Robbie, about how they've pretty much lived in this house ever since their death, over 100 years ago. And there's rules and stipulations with these ghosts that if, when they die, for example, whatever they're wearing is what they have to wear forever in the afterlife. And Robbie kind of admits that he's not the greatest ghost ever. He's not the greatest person at scaring, but his older sister Dora seems like she's a pro. And there's a scene where she's like practicing her scares in front of Robbie, and there's like face melting, and she can turn her skin, melt her flesh off and just show her bone and stuff. And Robbie, what he's good at is doing your typical moans and howls throughout the night type of stuff. And Robbie is kind of jealous of Dora, but the two of them decide that working together has worked for them in the past, and they're going to do what they need to do to get this family to move out. And the key to it as it's traditionally done for these two, have been throughout the years, to scare a kid and have the kid convince the parents that the house is haunted, and then they all move away. So Robbie goes into how over the years he's grown to like television and watching television and stuff, and he goes into why he's protective of the stuff that he used to have when he was alive that's still up in the attic that the boys were messing around with, and that's kind of upset him. So they decide to go scope out Sean and Robbie in the house. And we learn that, well, I don't want to spoil this part, but there's also a thing before we meet the ghosts about Robbie's little sister named Nell. And Nell is a character that the ghosts understand why Oliver doesn't like his little sister, because she's kind of like annoying and stuff. So they like to hang out in other rooms of the house, right? So while they're hanging out, the ghosts observe them, and the two get the idea that they're going to try to scare Oliver that night. So they come up with this plan. And the plan seems to be that it's going to pretty much just involve Robbie going into Oliver's room to scare him, right, with like moans and stuff. And once that happens, Oliver wakes up and thinks that it's his sister. His sister is moaning in the other room, gets his parents and stuff, and turns out the sister is fine. And Dora scolds Robbie for his inability to scare Oliver. And the two kind of realize that Oliver is going to be a tough cookie to crack, because he has like no reaction, no emotion to anything. And it's kind of funny. You know, I think what the book is going for with Oliver's character is that he's kind of like a cartoon, and that does get kind of annoying. But it's essentially saying that Oliver is just not afraid of anything, right? So Dora gets this idea and has this marvelous plan that's going to top Robbie's. So the next day, Sean comes back over to hang out with Oliver, and they're talking and hanging out for a little bit, and then Oliver wants to play a new PC game that he got. And while they're playing the game, there's something that pops up on the computer screen, and Robbie is overlooking his sister, seeing what's going on in the game, and realizes that it's her. And there's a really vivid scene of, let's just say, face melting in the game. And this scares Sean relentlessly, but Oliver has no reaction to it. And they can't seem to scare this kid doing this. And Oliver goes down to the dad, and they follow him, saying, okay, he's going to go to the dad, and they're going to say that they have to move, that this house is haunted. And he's like, the video game you bought me was supposed to be this one game, but it's actually some haunted house game, and it's lame. And the ghosts realize that they've been pretty much usurped again. And they realize that they're going to have to try something else outside of the house. So they come up with this idea that maybe they should follow Oliver to school to see if they can scare him at school. Well, this book shifts in and out of POVs, and on the way to school one day, Oliver and Sean are talking, and Sean has something to get off his chest and wants to reveal it to Oliver, but he can't really do it because Nell, Oliver's little sister, wants Oliver to walk her to a friend's house after school, and it's getting late and they have to, get ready to go to class and stuff. So Sean says, well, I'll tell you later, right? So while in class in Shadyside Middle School, Oliver is doing some math problems, and it's Dora's turn to try some scares in the classroom. So Dora gets this idea to go to Oliver's desk and take his pencils and start throwing them up at the ceiling with all of her power. And the concept behind the ghost power in this book is that they can manifest energy to show themselves physically to people, and they can also manifest energy to move objects. And the only people that can detect them are people with the sight. Now, how this works, I couldn't really tell you, and it's very loose whenever these ghosts do turn on their powers, because if they do, does that mean that people with the sight will be able to see them or not? I don't know. But Dora just starts throwing pencils up at the ceiling, right? And Oliver can't seem to react to it. And this upsets Dora, so she keeps doing it repeatedly every time he pulls out a new pencil. And Oliver has zero emotion to any of this. Meanwhile, all of his classmates around him are reacting to this, and it's causing a commotion, and the teacher tells everybody to settle down. And eventually, Oliver runs out of pencils. And like I said, not reacting to any of this. And he decides to stand on his desk to get some pencils that are stuck in the ceiling. And of course his teacher catches him and, scolds him about that. And then he ends up spinning around in his chair when he's trying to get back down. And that causes another commotion, and he still has no reaction to it. And it's played up so cartoonishly. I think that this is probably the worst scene in the whole book. Well, let's just say Dora is unable to scare Oliver. So it leads into the next class. It's a science class, and Robbie wants to try his hand at scaring him again. So there's like some Bunsen burners, and he gets this idea to kind of like show himself through the flames and say some like really satanic things, I guess. And when he does that, again, Oliver has no reaction to what's going on. And the ghosts start to really panic, and they come to this conclusion that Oliver's no ordinary kid. There's something wrong with this kid. There has to be something wrong. He does not react to any of this. So they are low on energy and need to go home and rest. So they head back to their house that they haunt, and they head into the attic to rest up a little bit. And they disappear out of the story for a little bit. And then we get the POV of Oliver, who is after school, and Sean comes and needs to talk to him about something, which is kind of dropping a hint, a foreshadow for a future event in the story. But Sean's unable to get it across because Oliver has to walk his sister to her friend's house. So later on, we catch back up with the sibling ghosts, and they're like, we need to come up with a bigger plan. We need to come up with something so extraordinary and triumphant that it's going to work. We're going to finally convince Oliver that ghosts are real. He's going to go run and tell his parents, and they're going to leave. And they kind of reconcile with each other because they realize that throughout this journey of trying to scare Oliver, they've stopped working together and started working individually to kind of show off in front of one another. But really, they should be going back to what they used to do and playing off each other's strengths to help each other, which I thought was kind of wholesome. Even though it gets kind of corny when they want to use bed sheets as part of their scare plan, but it is what it is. And this leads to the climax, where Oliver's hanging out with Sean again, and Sean has something he needs to confess, and they're hanging out, and they're about to play some checkers, and the sibling ghosts decide this is going to be the time to enact the plan, and it gets out of hand, let's just say, and there's a whole scene where they're standing on a table, and checkerboard pieces fly everywhere, and the table's hovering in the air, and both of the boys are on it, and the table turns upside down and just falls on top of the kids. And let's just say something happens to Sean, and this freaks the ghosts out. They're like, what did we do? We just crossed the line. The ghosts are like, we think we just killed a kid. And then Oliver hit his head real hard and is having memory problems and doesn't know what's going on. And then he sees Sean get up from the table, and the ghosts hide in the wall, and they can't believe what they're seeing. And they're like, well, Sean has to be dead. He has to be a ghost to be able to do what he just did. And Sean essentially reveals to Oliver that he's been, mild spoiler, a ghost the whole time. And this shocks Oliver, and he doesn't know what to think. But Sean tries to prove to him that he's actually a ghost, and that ghosts are real, and that he needs to admit that ghosts are real. And after doing a few things I don't want to spoil, Oliver comes to admit that, okay, you're right. Maybe ghosts are real. And after that, there seemingly is a plan that Oliver has, right? And it feeds into the ending of the story here. Now, the ending is an out of the left field ending here, but let's just say Oliver comes up with this plan as to kind of lead a misdirect towards what's been going on throughout the rest of the story. He maybe has known that this stuff was happening to him the whole time, maybe has been ignoring it, maybe not. I don't want to go too deep into it. But let's just say there's a twist involved that recontextualizes the whole story. It involves the sibling ghosts, and it involves Sean. Even involves the family, Oliver's family. And it gives reason to why Oliver's been behaving this way the whole book, right? We find out what happens to the sibling ghosts. We find out what happens to Sean. And the story wraps up there. And that's as far as I'm going to go with this book. Okay, so, yeah, let's start off with the positives. If I didn't mention this beforehand, the Ghosts of Fear Street books are ghost written. And I think this book was written by Nina Kuricki Hoffman, my bad. And this is the first book I've ever read by her. While it's not the greatest written book, and it does feel like a stiff ghost written book where, you know, R.L. Stine probably wrote the outlines and stuff, and Hoffman went in there and just stuck to the storyline as closely as possible. I do think that, given the premise, I think she was able to deliver some fun characters here. I think Robbie and Dora were easily the highlights of the book. Being able to read their first person, well, not specifically Dora, because it was only Robbie, but reading the perspective of a villain in a kid's horror book is hardly ever done. The only other book I've read personally that has done this so far is Slappy's Nightmare. And if you're a fan of Slappy's Nightmare, you might like this just because of that premise. Even though this is not an iconic icon like Slappy is, these ghosts aren't iconic, but it still suits that same idea, right? And I love it as a refreshing type of idea to go into a book with. The humor in this book. Now, I'm just going to get this off my chest. I don't normally say this. Some people do like to use this expression. Some books you just don't take seriously. Now, 99% of the time I don't take that saying, you know, to the heart, because I usually take books seriously, right? When I'm reading horror, normally that means serious tone stories. Now, there are horror comedies out there, right? But when I say that this one time I didn't take a book seriously, it's this book. And let me explain. This book, for the first half of it is mostly exposition. You don't know what kind of story it's going to be by the time you get to it, because it's setting itself up like a hybrid of You Can't Scare Me and My Best Friend is Invisible. But once it starts in that middle portion, and you see how cartoonish Oliver is, you can't take this story seriously. So, after all these, you know, scare scenes throughout the whole story, they're treated like a cartoon punchline, like you would see in Looney Tunes or Tom and Jerry, at the expense of the characters that you root against. And it's still funny in that cartoonish way. It's hard to explain. It has this situational irony that lands just like a Parks and Recreation episode or The Office as well. it's a funny book. And for if you're like an intellectual and you're into that kind of stuff, this might land for you, right? If you're not into those shows, or you're not into, comedy horror, this is probably not going to be for you. But I had some genuine laughs with this book. And the book did have some emotions to it. I really enjoyed the growth of Robbie and Dora as they grew apart because of their, competitiveness trying to scare Oliver. Then they grew closer by the end. I really dug that. But I also really enjoyed Sean, the side character that we got to see in the story. And even though there's breadcrumbs dropped throughout the book that make it kind of predictable with this character, that reveal in the climax, I think, helps the book in a lot of ways, and I'll get into that in just a sec. But that was really good stuff. And segueing into the finish of the book, while the ending isn't the greatest ending ever, and I'm kind of mixed on it, it's more of like a take it or leave it ending for me. I think the story, for what it is fine by the end. Given the revelation we got with Sean and how the story wraps up, everything makes sense to why it was in the story, if that makes any sense. But getting into the negatives, and now I do have a lot to unpack with this book, okay? The first thing I want to bring up, okay, is Oliver. Oliver is a bona fide cartoon, right? Even though the ending explains why he acted that way throughout the story, he was very over the top. Now, I do like me some over the top characters, like cartoonish characters. Like, I love Adder from The Tale of the Vampire Town from Are You Afraid of the Dark? I love Amy from Are You Terrified Yet? Those are two big cartoonish characters that I love. But I don't feel like those characters go overboard in those stories. Here, I think that time and time again, Oliver is just acting like a Looney Tunes cartoon, to quote BD Horror here. And that one scene of the book that I mentioned in the plot overview, the school scene where they're in the room and Dora is trying to scare them with pencils, that is so ludicrous and cartoonish, it's almost insulting. How Oliver acts so stiff throughout the whole story just makes Dora and Robbie come off kind of like buffoons and incompetent. Even though by the end, like I said, that's not really the case. But it was frustrating reading it. And I don't think the ending really makes up for all the frustration. Especially in scenes like the pencil scene. That got old quick. And it was throughout the entirety of the book. But it got old reading it. But once you got to the reactions of Dora and Robbie, it did kind of get funny. But it's a mixed bag of a thing with this character. Another thing I want to get into is the writing of Hoffman. Now, I do think that she was able to deliver some really good characters with Robbie and Dora, but however, I think Hoffman's writing here in the third person, because let's just address this. The book goes from third person to first person back to third person many times in the story. And when it's in third person, the writing feels super stiff. And I think it might be from, following the outlines of the books too closely, that, the outlines that Stein gives them to, work with. I don't think she can write third person that well. And also, there's some tense issues here. Like, the story's in past tense, but it'll be in present tense for some of the verbs. And I saw that like 2 or 3 times. And then when it's in third person, when it's writing about Oliver, for example, which the whole book is in third person, minus the first person in quotes, there'll be some sentences that's not in quotes or referencing anything with first person pronouns. Okay, like, what kind of writing is this? That's what I kept thinking throughout the book. I'm like, there's some errors here. I don't know if the editors just glanced over them or not. I don't know. It just, the writing just made it hard for me to get engrossed into the book, if I'm being honest. There's one page where Robbie and Dora, the names of the ghost characters, were like used like 15 to 20 times on one page. And I'm the type of like reader, if I see the same words repeatedly on one page, I get all flustered and I have to like really slow down my reading. And it happened multiple pages because of, like I said, it's just the way Hoffman framed the third person. It just felt super stiff, and yeah, I don't know what else to say. I guess in terms of story, my negatives would be the first half of the book, at least the first 45 pages, is mostly exposition setting up the story. And while that's fine, there's not a lot going on in that first 45 pages. Mind you, this book is only 108 pages, okay? It is mostly exposition. The biggest thing you get out of it is the backstory of Robbie and Dora. And the explanation behind why they haunt and stuff, how long they've been dead, how some of this ghost stuff operates in the story. I didn't bring it up too much, but the whole stuff with the sight, with people, only people with the sight can see them. That's a cool concept. How they have to store energy and stuff to be able to manifest, you know, their physical form and stuff. That's a cool little twist to it. They have to like recharge and stuff. But other than that, there's nothing much to that first half of the book. And once we get into the, I guess, pranks or scares, pretty much every single thing that Robbie does to try to get a scare is very uneventful and not impressive, and it's kind of cringe. Kind of corny, too. Dora's scare is a little more creative, minus the pencil one. That one was really bad. And it just kind of fails on making anything scary in this book. There's nothing really scary, minus a couple of scenes of graphic body horror, and some that one scene where there was a ginormous fake out that the ghost killed a kid. Other than that, it's pretty much bare bones here. Yeah, and that's kind of depressing. But the ending, like I said, it's a take it or leave it ending to me, but I feel like the book didn't capitalize on its potential. I thought it was going to go a whole different direction than it went, and it kind of went this whole goofy direction, which, like I said, it works because the recontextualization fits, but I was hoping for something darker or a little more clever by the end than what we got, and that was a letdown for me. So yeah, from a 0 to 5 star basis, I'm going to be honest, y'all, I struggle with this one because on one hand, I can see myself giving this book a low C, and on one hand, I can see myself giving this book a D. Now, I'm going to be upfront. For all the problems I said, I deducted 1.5 off the top, and it's automatically down to a 3.5 out of 5. Now, if I wanted to be a little more harsh on it, I could. And I was teetering between a 3.3 to a 3.5, but I just decided to keep it at a 3.5, which is a C-, only because of the perspective of the villains of the story. I think that concept alone is worth me putting into the C tier. If it did not have that, this would be a solid D tier for me. Because of just the writing itself, I think puts it into the B tier alone, and then all the story problems and the annoyances would take it down to there. But like I said, that first person perspective of the villains is a fun shakeup, and that alone is enough for me to give it a C, because it's just, you just don't see that. But I'm not trying to praise it higher than it is. I think this book is more fine and average, maybe a light good, if I'm going to use adjectives. But I would technically recommend this book. Not all the way, but I would recommend to try this, because it seems, like I said early on in the video, this could be a love it or hate it book for people. It just depends on what you're looking for. I think this book is more niche because it's a more comedic book and it's more for intellectual humor. If that's your speed, you'll probably really dig this. If that's not, I don't know what to tell you. Maybe don't try this. But yeah, that's my thoughts on why I'm not afraid of ghosts. Let me know down in the comment section if you've read this book. Do you love this or do you hate this? I'm dying to know. And I'll see you next time.